Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name's John Corvin. I'm an SAP Security Architect at Layer 7 Security. We're an SAP Services partner, and we focus exclusively on security for SAP systems. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you about one of the greatest shifts that's happening in the world today. The reason I consider this to be a shift and not a trend or anything else is that the threat of cyber attacks is not something that's likely to disappear anytime soon. The evidence suggests that it's something far more likely to be a permanent feature of our lives, and something that we, as security professionals, have to come to terms with. Without being too dramatic, failure to come to terms with this shift could quite literally cost us our jobs. Of course, there's always been threats and breaches. I've worked in security for 15 years, so much of what we're seeing today is not new to me. But what is new is the organization, the sophistication, and the scale of the attacks, which is truly unprecedented. Every week, there appears to be a new roll call of organizations that are falling victim to cyber attacks. So far this year, we've seen Home Depot suffer a payment card breach, which, according to some sources, may be larger than that experienced even by Target. We've learned about a coordinated attack against 5 of the largest banks in the U.S., most likely stemming from Russia. Sometime before this incident, there were confirmed breaches at UPS, SuperValue, and an attack against one of the largest hospital networks in the U.S. that led to the theft of 4.5 million patient records. Data breaches have gone from being a rare and extraordinary event to something that occurs almost on a daily basis. We're going to walk through some of the data on cyber risks and data breaches in a few minutes, but it's fair to say that all the data is pointing to one of 3 things. Firstly, cyber attacks are increasing. The volume of cyber attacks are at a level we've never seen before. Secondly, the impact of attacks is growing as organizations become more open, more integrated, and reliant on IT systems. And thirdly, most organizations are unprepared for this threat. SAP systems are not immune from cyber attacks. There's nothing unique or special about SAP systems that enable them to avoid the threats that attack almost every other business or web application. In fact, there are some unique architectural and systemic risks that may mean SAP systems are more susceptible to cyber threats than other less common applications. In this webinar, we're not only going to review the threats to SAP systems, but outline a proven strategy and roadmap to secure systems from advanced threats. The strategy is developed by our SAP security architects based on lessons learned from hundreds of frontline engagements and benchmarked against leading practices and SAP recommendations. What's more, it leverages standards, components, and tools available to all SAP customers without licensing third-party security solutions. As far as SAP systems are concerned, data breaches are not inevitable. There are real, concrete actions that you can take immediately to vastly reduce the likelihood and impact of any attack. We'll present a solution that'll provide your SAP systems with the optimal level of protection against cyber threats, using an approach that can be implemented immediately, at zero cost or a fraction of the cost of alternative approaches. Let's start with a quick story, a true story, which I think you'll find is relevant to our discussion today, and also all too common. This is the homepage for our website. If you logged on to layer7security.com today, this is what you would see. If you've logged on a while ago, instead of this, you would have seen something like this. And that's because, like many other companies out there, we were the victim of a cyber attack. We hired a well-known company to design, program, and implement this site for us, and I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that they did a great job. But clearly, the security of the site was lacking. There were certain vulnerabilities in the site that were exploited by external hackers. Of course, this was a big shock to us. We didn't think we would be the victim of an attack. We fell into a trap that most companies fall into. We didn't consider ourselves to be a target. After all, we don't store or process any sensitive data. We operate exclusively in the SAP space. We're strictly business to business and only really deal with SAP customers, so the fact that we would be a target was a real surprise to us. This was a wake-up call that led us to implement an array of technologies to secure our site against such attacks in the future, including a web application firewall, IP blocks for certain countries, and automated code and file scanning, which are not at all common for this type of website. But most of all, our experience brought home the message that getting hacked isn't always about being a target. We were hacked because we could be hacked. It was fun. It was a sport. The lesson is that regardless of our size, your industry, or anything else, we're all potential targets for cyber attack. There are no safe havens anymore, no safe sectors or industries. We're all at risk. This is illustrated by this direct quote from the recent 9/11 Commission. It describes the cyber domain as the battlefield of the future. It's also illustrated by the data on cyber risks. It's fair to say that the data on cyber risks paints a very consistent picture of security threats today. When examining the data, the first fact that stands out is that cyber risks is now firmly a board-level issue. In fact, according to some reports, cyber risk is rated as the third most significant risk by board executives. And 2/3 of companies, across all sectors and regions, describe the risk of cyber attack as a significant issue that could have a major strategic implication. This is a very important point that comes from a great report published by McKinsey and the World Economic Forum earlier this year, which for the first time looked at the strategic implications of cyber risks and attacks, not just in terms of direct and indirect costs, which is a conventional way of looking at the impact of cyber risks. We're going to come back to this a little later, and we'll examine exactly what we mean when we say strategic impact. The second fact that jumps out at you is that attacks are increasing in volume, diversity, and sophistication. All of the vast research in this area points out to a massive increase in targeted and untargeted attacks. The majority of attacks are opportunistic, untargeted, and performed by external agents using hacking techniques. This is illustrated by our own experience. If you look at the attack that we suffered, we were a textbook example of typical scenarios. We were hacked by an external group that used hacking methods to exploit a vulnerability in one of our add-ons. The attack was untargeted, since there's no reason why anyone would target us. The third fact that stands out from the research is that organizations across all industries are at risk from state-sponsored espionage, targeting the theft of intellectual property. Studies have shown that company valuations are based mainly on the value of their intellectual property, rather than their tangible assets. Therefore, when attackers target intellectual property, they are in effect going after the heart of an organization. Unlike attacks performed by hacktivists and cyber criminals, these forms of attacks are usually highly organized and difficult to detect. They're often performed on an industrial scale by state-sponsored actors. So this is a threat you cannot afford to ignore. In terms of measuring the impact, as I said earlier, it's important to take both an operational and a financial perspective, as well as to look at the strategic impact of cyber risks. Focusing purely on financial and operational aspects, we can see there are essentially two categories of costs: direct and indirect. Indirect costs are by far the most significant of the two. They comprise on average about 70% of the costs of a data breach. Direct costs are the costs we usually associate with cyber attacks, since they include legal fees, forensics investigations, and hardware and software upgrades. According to one of the most renowned studies on the cost of data breaches, average direct and indirect costs range between $1.1 million and $5.4 million in specific countries. The U.S. happens to be at the top end of that scale, so you're looking at an average of $5.4 million. But please bear in mind that these are averages, so actual costs can be way in excess of this. Target, for example, has incurred around $148 million of charges as a result of its breach to data, and that figure's growing. In terms of intellectual property theft, the estimated cost to the U.S. economy alone is $13 billion a year. Now, this is directly from a 2012 FBI report. If anything, the cost is likely to have grown over the last 2 years. 80% of investors would not invest in companies with a history of cyber attacks. This illustrates how cyber risk has a direct and sizable impact on investor confidence. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. After all, very few of us would invest in a company that had proven security issues. The next fact is also from the McKinsey report I'd mentioned earlier. The figure of $3 trillion over the next 6 years may sound excessive, but when you take into account how McKinsey derived this number, it starts to make sense. That's because, unlike other studies, McKinsey didn't look at the direct and indirect costs of data breaches. They assessed the opportunity cost to all organizations that fail to take advantage of new technological trends because of security concerns. The figure's high because it's based on the impact of cyber risk on all organizations, not just those that have been breached, and because it takes a strategic, rather than operational perspective on the impact of cyber threats. Essentially, McKinsey are saying that cyber risk impacts us all. They hinder organizations from investing in developments such as the cloud, mobility, and in-memory computing, and therefore realizing the productivity gains that are delivered by such technologies. Secure organizations, on the other hand, have a much better handle on security and are much more likely to invest confidently in new trends and reap the rewards. The final point here is on cyber insurance. Often, companies look at cyber insurance as a panacea for their security concerns. But the reality is that cyber insurance is relatively rare and generally expensive. Also, every standard policy offered by insurance carriers has exclusions for negligence. Therefore, companies need to have effective security measures in place as a prerequisite for collecting upon cyber insurance policies. Therefore, cyber insurance can help organizations share some of the risk of cyber threats, but it can't offset the impact when an organization is attacked. Again, Target is a great example of this. According to their most recent quarterly statement, cyber insurance will only cover around $40 million of the $150 million expense of the data breach incurred by the company. The final study we're going to discuss is the recent Global Information Security Survey performed by PwC. This is a great study that examines how organizations are responding to the growing threat of cyber attack. What PwC found was that most organizations aren't equipped to deal with this threat, either in terms of skill levels or tool sets. They are outstripped by attackers in both respects. Intruders are taking advantage of a growing attack surface and bypassing perimeter defenses to perform dynamic attacks. According to PwC, although business executives are taking note of this threat, most overestimate their ability to defend against sophisticated attacks. Overall, few companies have kept pace with cyber risks and are prepared to manage the threat. So how does this relate to SAP systems? As I said earlier, there's very little that separates an SAP system from other business or web applications in terms of architecture. In fact, before the SAP NetWeaver application server was renamed, it was known as the NetWeaver Web Application Server, because essentially that's what it was. It supported many of the same types of standards and protocols as a conventional web application server, and still does, even after the renaming. This includes support for web services and protocols such as HTTP. That's because SAP systems today are designed to be interoperable and to support integration and information exchange between different systems using common standards and even open standards. As a result of this relative openness, SAP systems are vulnerable to many of the same vulnerabilities that commonly affect web applications. If you look here at the 10 most common vulnerabilities according to OWASP, you would note that SAP systems are vulnerable to each and every one of these vulnerabilities. This includes various forms of injection attacks, such as code and SQL injection, cross-site scripting, directory traversal, and security misconfiguration. This really emphasizes the point that architecturally, SAP systems are as vulnerable as any other system to common types of common attack vectors used to compromise systems. They're also vulnerable to systemic risk. This is unique to business applications such as SAP. Because these systems are so popular and so widely deployed, hackers are able to leverage techniques used successfully against SAP systems in one organization against other organizations that are running the same systems, often with identical configurations. SAP attack vectors are well known and very accessible in hacking forums. What makes it worse is that most organizations are completely unaware about this fact and have done very little to address these vulnerabilities. Many of you have heard the warning made by SAP security researchers at the tail end of last year about the possibility of a wave of SAP attacks. This was caused by the discovery of a modified Trojan that was targeting SAP clients and was capable of logging keystrokes, including passwords and usernames, changing registry files, and a variety of other actions in an attempt to get at back-end SAP servers. This is one variety of many types of malware that we're seeing right now, targeting business applications. SAP systems have also been the victims of hacktivists, including the most widely known group, Anonymous. Anonymous are suspected of possessing zero-day SAP vulnerabilities and of bringing down SAP systems at organizations that are in the public eye, including most famously the Greek Ministry of Finance. Now, at the Black Hat Security Conference earlier this year, there was a live demonstration performed by a security researcher that demonstrated just how easy it is to compromise payment card data and reroute payments within SAP systems by exploiting known vulnerabilities. It was a great session. A recording of the demonstration is available on YouTube, and there's even a white paper published by the researcher that outlines the attack methodology. So, how do we secure SAP systems? Well, first off, we have to tackle the myths that often prevent customers from taking proactive steps that are necessary to harden their systems against cyber attack. The first is the myth that SAP systems are secure by default. Unfortunately, I wish this was the case, but it's not. The reality is that there are many standard SAP security settings that are insecure and violate even SAP's own recommendations. That's essentially because SAP can't deliver a standard configuration that's secure by default. Many of the security features that are available in SAP systems have to be actively enabled and customized and tuned by customers based on their environment and their business decisions. For example, if we look at network filters, forensic logs, encryption, and other types of tools and technologies that are provided by SAP, they are generally speaking not enabled by default. The onus is on the customer to enable these features and to customize them for their environment. The second myth is that network perimeter controls can prevent external attackers accessing SAP systems. Here we're talking primarily about firewalls and IPS, IDS, and other forms of network security systems. I don't think anyone would question that network-level controls are an important component of security for any type of system landscape. But unfortunately, in and of themselves, they're not sufficient. The reason is that most conventional firewalls, IDS and IPS systems are not capable of analyzing SAP traffic. They don't have the ability to analyze SAP payloads used in SAP protocols. Therefore, they can't filter and control SAP traffic. For that, you have to rely on application-level gateways delivered by SAP. So essentially, you need a second tier of network controls to augment your network firewalls. This is a very important point because we often come across organizations with poorly configured SAP systems relying too heavily on their network-level controls based on this myth that firewalls and IPS systems can prevent intrusion attempts against SAP systems. The third myth is that SAP GRC, or equivalent third-party access management tools can protect against insider and outsider threats. The reality is they don't. SAP GRC monitors for many internal threats that require authorizations in SAP systems. However, many SAP exploits, including those that are included in our control framework, don't require any authorizations. Therefore, attackers can bypass GRC tools that monitor SAP authorizations by targeting components that don't use the SAP authorization concept. The final myth is that securing SAP systems requires licensing expensive third-party solutions. External vulnerability management tools are indeed expensive, and there's no getting around that. But the reality is, you can do a far more effective job with tools available in Solution Manager than with any third-party software. All of these tools are made available to you by SAP without any additional licensing cost. In fact, in most cases, these tools are already installed in your systems. They just have to be enabled. The point is worth repeating. All the tools that you need to secure your SAP systems against even the most advanced forms of cyber attack are already at your disposal and available to you within your existing SAP systems. So, how do you go about building security? Well, firstly, security has to be integrated. Therefore, it has to go beyond the SAP layer. This is supported by a recommendation made by SAP that emphasizes the point that to truly secure SAP landscapes, you have to apply measures across multiple interconnected layers. We typically refer to SAP systems as systems, but in reality, they're ecosystems. Ecosystems that are comprised of both SAP and non-SAP technologies. Now, all of these technologies across the various layers have to work in unison to create a secure environment. Therefore, the first thing you must do is take a holistic approach that secures every component of the SAP technology stack. This includes networks, operating systems, application servers, and of course, databases. The idea here is to create multiple barriers between attackers and their targets to develop defense in depth. Databases, platforms, and servers should be hardened in line with security benchmarks. Organizations such as SANS, CIS, and NIST are a reliable source of benchmarks and standards. However, security doesn't rest on your infrastructure alone. You also need to secure your custom code. Therefore, it's important to follow SAP's secure programming guidelines when developing custom programs, function modules, and other objects. Also, a static code scan should be regularly performed to detect program-level vulnerabilities. There are specific SAP-delivered tools that you can leverage built into the ABAP workbench to do just that, but we're not going to get into that today because that's beyond the scope of our discussion. Over the years, the most common criticism that SAP customers have expressed to us is over the absence of clear guidelines or benchmarks for securing SAP systems. So with that in mind, we developed a security framework that met this need. The framework is benchmarked against leading practices and SAP recommendations, and is based on lessons learned from hundreds of frontline engagements performed by Layer 7 Security. For the first time, SAP customers have a strong standard, which can be used as a benchmark to secure their SAP systems from even the most advanced forms of cyber attack. We've grouped our recommendations into 20 controls across 5 control objectives. The control objectives are quite simply, secure your network, protect remote function calls, control access. Here we're talking primarily about basis level access. Maintain log information, and manage the configuration. We're going to go through each of these components in the next few slides, but the important thing to remember is that this framework is probably the most robust standard that you can use to secure your SAP systems. In fact, it's the only framework developed specifically for SAP systems. It incorporates proven techniques to harden SAP systems against known security vulnerabilities using standard tools available to all SAP customers without purchasing any additional add-ons or third-party software. Okay, so let's cycle through the objectives one by one and review them in more detail. The first is also one of the broadest. Securing the network involves clustering and segmenting SAP systems into different security groups using firewall rules. This requires multiple network zones for different systems and scenarios. It involves configuring single-purpose servers. Therefore, you shouldn't, for example, have application services running on the same host as database services, since each service type requires different security rules. This is not always possible with certain implementation scenarios of SAP HANA, but it can be applied for all of their scenarios. We spoke earlier about how network firewalls don't do a very effective job filtering SAP traffic. Therefore, application-level gateways such as the SAP router and the web dispatcher should be leveraged to implement more granular access control for SAP network connections. There are detailed recommendations in our white paper, Protecting SAP Systems from Cyber Attack, for configuring access control lists in these gateways. Just as a side note, you're probably going to hear me make several references to the paper during this webinar. The paper essentially walks through all of the actions you have to take to secure your systems in far more depth than we're going to cover in this discussion. The paper is available at our website. You can just scroll over to the second slider on the homepage and click the download button. Now, the third recommendation is to encrypt network communications using SNC and SSL. This is one of the few areas where we differ from SAP. According to SAP, you only need to encrypt network communications that traverse untrusted networks. In our view, you should take this a step further and encrypt all internal communications. This is based on the concept of layered controls that we discussed earlier, or defense in depth, which is about creating multiple hurdles between attackers and their targets to frustrate their efforts and slow them down so you can detect and repel any attack. Encrypting internal communications provides an added layer of defense in case you suffer a network breach and intruders attempt to sniff traffic inside your network for passwords or other sensitive information. Finally, disable dangerous web services. Minimize the number of open ports and services and remove redundant custom code. This will greatly reduce the surface area for potential attacks and enable you to focus monitoring efforts on a fewer number of access points into your systems. If I had to rank all 5 of the areas in the framework, I would probably say protecting remote function calls is the most important. This is because in our experience as pen testers and forensic investigators, RFC exploits are the most common way that SAP systems are attacked and breached. Often, this is caused by weaknesses in the configuration of gateway servers and missing ACLs in OS-level security files that control what users or systems can use RFC services. Therefore, it's critical to properly configure gateway servers and enable strong filters to secinfo and reginfo files that control the launching and registration of programs. It's also important to configure RFC destinations based on the principle of least privilege. Therefore, you should never assign more authorizations than are actually required for each destination. This is a common but dangerous flaw that enables attackers to target RFC destinations configured with administrative access privileges and use those privileges to hop from one system to another and compromise not just a system, but an entire SAP landscape. Trusted RFC relationships are often seen as a red flag, and some even go as far as saying that you should never use them. However, trusted connections don't present a security risk as long as they're used in the right scenario and configured properly. This means they should only be used to connect production systems or production systems to lower order systems, but never, for example, from development to production. Also, the underlying authorization objects for trusted destinations must be properly configured to secure the connections. Most attackers that target SAP systems are looking for one thing: the keys to the kingdom. These keys are usually specific authorizations that enable them to perform powerful administrative functions in SAP. The authorizations are usually standard across all SAP systems and widely known and documented. Therefore, it's important to control and closely monitor these authorizations and not to assign them too widely across your user base. The specific authorizations are detailed in the white paper, but this includes, in a nutshell, authorizations for user administration, system administration, including the ability to make OS and DB commands, table maintenance, and transporting changes across SAP systems. Many of these authorizations are delivered in standard SAP users and profiles. Therefore, users such as SAP Star and others should be locked, and of course, default passwords should be changed. A couple of other crucial recommendations in this section include ensuring that authorization checks are enabled across the board, and developer keys are removed in productive systems to ensure that changes cannot bypass the regular transport path. Maintaining log information is an area that often raises eyebrows from customers, but let me tell you why it's important. There are many people that believe that becoming a victim of a data breach is no longer a question of if, but when. If that's the case, the only thing you have to fall back on to know whether you've been breached and the extent of that breach is your audit trail. You simply cannot perform effective forensic investigations without extensive logs. This includes logs for network and system events, application and table-level changes, and user actions. Gone are the days when logging was a luxury and something you only did for specific systems or events. In today's world, you not only have to record almost every action in your system, you also have to continuously monitor the event logs for any sign of malicious activity. Fortunately, SAP systems provide an array of logs that you can enable to support secure monitoring and forensic investigations. If you're concerned about any potential impact on system performance, I can tell you from experience that logging should not impact performance, as long as you maintain file sizes and regularly archive log files. It's also important to secure your logs, both in transit and in storage, if you're replicating to another server, which is definitely recommended practice. The final area covers critical, security-relevant profile, instance, and other parameters, as well as procedures for monitoring and patching SAP systems. This includes parameters for single sign-on to prevent attackers from hijacking session cookies. It also includes parameters for enforcing strong password policies, and hashing algorithms and preventing users from authenticating against old password hashes, even if you've enabled the latest hashes. This area also includes parameters for client-level security that enable you to disable scripting, input history, and shortcut commands in SAP GUI, which are often targeted by attackers. Now, once you've secured your systems, you need to ensure you stay secure in an automated and efficient way. The most effective way to achieve this goal is through standard monitoring tools available in Solution Manager. We have an entire section dedicated to monitoring using Solution Manager coming up, but we can say for now, these tools enable you to implement continuous security monitoring for managed systems in your SAP landscapes without investing in any add-ons or third-party software. The specific security measures that need to be applied across databases and operating systems depend on the type of technology that's deployed in each environment. Therefore, we can't get into too many specifics here, but it's important to follow the security recommendations of Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, or any other product you're using, as well as the recommendations in security benchmarks issued by organizations such as CIS, NIST, and SANS. SAP has also published some of its own recommendations for OS and DB security. Just a couple of things here. If you're using Oracle, you should ensure you've secured the ops user, since there are well-known bypasses for the ops mechanism used to authenticate the SAP system user. Secondly, if you have the ability to enable TDE, please do so for specific tables or columns, since this will secure data at rest while still keeping data transparent to the SAP application layer. Finally, if you're running SAP HANA, please follow the recommendations of our white paper on HANA, which covers both appliances and cloud-based solutions. This graphic illustrates the 5 components of security monitoring using Solution Manager. They're all part of the diagnostics infrastructure and are accessed through work centers such as change management and root cause analysis, or RCA. The first, and probably most important, is configuration validation. This is used to perform automated vulnerability assessments of managed systems in SAP landscapes. It essentially performs a daily security check for every system in your landscape to discover any vulnerabilities that may expose your system to cyber threats. This can include dangerous web services that have been enabled in your systems, insecure RFC destinations, misconfigured profile parameters, users with excessive privileges, and many other security risks. It produces a variety of different reports that flag vulnerable areas and enable you to determine how well your systems are complying against your security policies. The second component is system recommendations. This connects to SAP support to identify security notes that need to be implemented in your systems. It's far more comprehensive than S-Note and RSEC Note and removes many of the false positives you often get with other tools, since it analyzes notes down to the component and release level. The third area is change analysis. This enables you to drill down into the root cause of changes that may have led to security vulnerabilities in systems by enabling you to discover which specific settings in parameters and other areas were changed, and when the change occurred, since every change is time-stamped. This is also useful when diagnosing the cause of performance issues in your systems. The fourth area is alerting. Solution Manager delivers the ability to automatically generate text message alerts and email alerts for a critical vulnerability discovered by configuration validation. This enables you to quickly discover and communicate vulnerabilities within your teams and immediately follow up on security events. And the final area is security dashboards. These provide a visual depiction of security issues across your landscape. There are a number of security apps that can be leveraged in the standard SAP dashboarding platform to build powerful consoles to monitor the security of SAP systems. Many of our customers choose to configure dashboards on large monitors in the center of their offices, so administrators can monitor security levels in near real time. The data feed for the dashboards can be automatically refreshed as often as every 5 minutes. As you can see, Solution Manager delivers a number of great tools to secure and monitor your systems. You can use them individually or collectively as part of a centralized security operations center. Performance-wise, the functionality and the performance of these tools goes beyond anything offered by third-party software. Also, there's a clear economic case for using Solution Manager, since you maximize your return on investment and minimize capital expenditure and operating expenditure by leveraging standard SAP components. The journey of securing your SAP systems against cyber risks may seem long and complex, but I'd like to share something that we use during our customer engagements to help simplify and break down the process into manageable phases. This is a roadmap for implementing the recommendations in the cybersecurity framework that we've just walked through. It's a 4-step process that begins with risk assessment and ends with enabling continuous monitoring through Solution Manager. The first step is the performance of a risk assessment, which involves taking stock of your SAP systems to identify high-risk assets. The second step is assessing your systems to discover security gaps. The third is the remediation phase, which involves ranking and prioritizing issues before removing them entirely. We recommend using the DREAD threat model to help with this step, which we'll outline in a few moments. The final step is enabling and configuring diagnostics tools to ensure your systems stay secure. Often, we find that companies skip the first step and jump right into a security assessment. A better way is to step back and assess your environment, inventory your systems, and focus your resources on systems that are critical to your business. This involves ranking your systems using any number of risk factors. We commonly use factors such as subnetwork, is the system internal or external facing, data sensitivity, does it process or store sensitive data, Environment, is it a production, test, or development system? And finally, system interfaces. Does it have integration points with other systems inside or outside of the organization? It's also important to define your risk tolerances and indicators, which may be unique for your organization or industry. Generally, the idea is to prioritize external-facing systems and systems in productive environments that store, process, or transmit sensitive data. This doesn't mean you'll only test high-priority systems, but it does mean that you'll focus your efforts on critical systems. Often, because of resource or budget constraints, you don't have the luxury of testing all systems in your landscape, and you're forced to go with a sample-based approach. Just a quick word of advice. If you are sampling, make sure your sample is representative of your landscape. In other words, don't select just 2 systems if you have 200 across your environments. Also, make sure that the samples include as many of the different systems types, whether they are ABAP or Java or Dual. For the assessment phase, leverage the SAP Cybersecurity framework as your benchmark to perform the security gap analysis. All of the required actions and controls are neatly listed in the appendix of the white paper. You simply just need to work through your systems one by one, using a checklist approach, and document your gaps as you go. The appendix includes a remediation effort scale. This is a useful tool that will help you estimate how much effort you have to allocate to remove every one of your security gaps in terms of resources, time, and complexity. For rating and ranking issues, we highly recommend the DREAD threat model. We use it extensively, and it goes down very well with our clients. This model was developed by Microsoft, and it's a great way of gauging the probability and impact of cyber risks. The standard high, medium, low scale doesn't give you the richness of information you need to truly understand the importance of security vulnerabilities. For example, you don't just need to know what the damage potential of a vulnerability is if it was exploited. You also need to understand how likely it is that that vulnerability could be exploited by an attacker. The DREAD threat model is one of the few frameworks that makes that type of judgment. The various factors in the model, discoverability, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and damage potential, are all rated on a scale of 1 to 10. The combined score of all these factors is used to rate the underlying vulnerability. Anything higher than 29 is generally considered high risk and deserves special attention. The higher the score, the more critical the vulnerability. The last point is self-evident, but it's worth noting. Changes should always follow the established migration path and be thoroughly tested before they're applied in productive systems. Sustainment is the final step of the roadmap, and the one where you cap off all your great work by enabling automated monitoring to ensure that your newly hardened systems stay secure. In most cases, this is fairly quick and painless exercise. That's because most of the components that you need for security monitoring are already installed in Solution Manager. They just need to be enabled and customized. You need to verify your Solution Manager release and SP level. Higher releases and SP levels will deliver the most functionality. Enable diagnostics, which includes the configuration and change database, or CCDB for short. The CCDB is not an actual database. It's just a collection of tables within the Solution Manager database. Confirm managed systems have been fully mapped and configured in Solution Manager. Group systems into comparison lists. This makes it quicker and easier to access your systems and apply different security policies for specific groups. Customize your security checks. The great thing about configuration validation is that you can tune the security rules for each environment or system. Therefore, you don't have to apply a vanilla security policy across all your systems. Finally, enable alerts and security dashboards. We recommend performing a proof of concept in dev environments before enabling monitoring in productive systems. This will enable you to demonstrate the benefits of monitoring using Solution Manager and tune your security policies and settings before scaling up to monitor your entire environment. We have a maxim here at Layer 7, and that's quite simply that you need to act today to prevent the breach tomorrow. The standard SAP configuration does not provide a sufficient level of protection against cyber threats. Neither do firewalls, IPS systems, or software such as GRC. You can't rely on these tools alone. The only proven strategy is the approach outlined in the Cybersecurity framework for the SAP layer and the hardening of the entire SAP technology stack. Therefore, take action. Use the framework as your baseline to secure your SAP systems today. Unfortunately, there's no quick fix. There's no single tool that's going to magically secure your systems overnight. However, there are a number of tools delivered by Solution Manager that can help you identify changes and vulnerabilities in your SAP systems that may expose them to cyber attack. Now, if you're interested in professional services to either discover and remove vulnerabilities in your SAP systems or to enable security monitoring using Solution Manager, read our solution briefs available at layer7security.com. We offer a range of solutions to audit your systems and enable security checks using pre-built policies in tools such as configuration validation. All right, with that, we're going to conclude with some background on Layer 7 Security. We're a company that's focused exclusively on SAP security. We're an SAP services partner with industry-leading experience, expertise, and insight in the subject of SAP security. We empower customers to unlock the security capabilities of Solution Manager. Finally, we have an international cross-industry portfolio. We're headquartered in Toronto, Canada. You can learn more about us at layer7security.com. You can reach me at this email address and this telephone number. Please follow our blog. We post regularly on trends and developments in SAP security. You can also follow our Twitter feed at Layer7. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. I hope you've gained some valuable insights from this session that are going to help you take the first steps towards securing your SAP systems in the near future. Goodbye.